I mean, you know, Lauren, a lot of these people made a huge mistake by picking this one when there's so many better ones that are happening at the same exact time. I'm going to give it my very best. I'm going to put everything I have into this, and we're going to talk about explicit instruction. So, yes, my name is Zach, and here are some of the things that I have been doing lately. This book right here, Just Tell Them, was number one in education for a long time on Amazon, and it's something uh, I'm really passionate about getting the message out. In this presentation, a lot of it is in the books, so I recommend you check it out. Progressively Incorrect. I don't know how many people here have been listening to the podcast, but a lot of the presenters that are here at Patton today have been on the podcast. If you want to bring this conference into your commute, in your car and listen to the great debates of education around the science of learning and the science of math, I really recommend you check out Progressively Incorrect. And finally, I'm the director of Step Lab North America, which is a platform for instructional coaches. And we're transforming instructional coaching around the globe in 14,000 schools. So let's go ahead and get right into the presentation. Now, um, th most people have seen this because it's the best video in all of education movie Hollywood history. Um, uh, and I think a lot of people see this caricature when they think of direct and explicit instruction. When you talk to the person off at the cocktail party, or the parent, or the random person you encounter, and you mention the words direct and explicit, teacher led, it sort of conjures images of this guy right here.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone, the Great Depression, passed the, anyone, a tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
And, ha ha ha. But um I my professors in teacher school, I graduated in 2000. Who knows? I taught for 14 years before this year, and this for the first time I'm outside of the classroom. The My professors were really fond of lecturing us about how bad lecturing was. And in a lot of ways they were right. What we just saw there was sort of an example of like this transient monologue between uh, a teacher who's just sort of transmitting knowledge and students who are passively meant to absorb all the things that he's saying. It's bad teaching. And essentially, we can just call that lecturing, right? Lecturing is not a great form of teaching for so many reasons, as we'll discuss today. But um, the the folks who trained me up in teaching kind of went a step further in a lot of cases. A lot of these caricatures, sort of black and white images of the stern traditionalist, the sort of disciplinarian. There was this, I was communicated that in order to prepare students for the 21st century and turn them into mathematicians, we needed to abandon a lot of the structures that I later found out have been proven to be very effective at teaching and inspiring kids. I heard things like this. Maybe you've heard this before. Um, Better to be a guide on the side than a sage on the stage. Things like he who does the talking does the learning. Um, I don't teach students or content. they teach me, right? Um, which is so cringy. But um, uh, I'm not a contrarian by nature, and so when I heard these lessons from my teacher training program, I listened to them. I really thought it would be important to move away from as far away as possible from anything that resembled this because I didn't want to do wrong by kids. And at least images like these appear on Facebook all the time doesn't even deserve a citation because they're they're meant to provoke emotions about school, that school is somehow like a prison because there are doors. There are doors, there's squares involved in schools because of buildings. I don't know, right? But this idea that if we can transform education into something that's better and bigger and more, uh, sort of a romantic view of how learning happens and how kids develop, that the world would be a better place. So I mean, I spent most of my time when I was first teaching trying to replicate this in my classroom. My this is my thinking process. I want to be a great teacher. So what I should do is reduce the amount of direct teaching that I give and minimize my role and the amount of talk that I give. You can see how that's kind of how I was, that's those are what sort of formed the first 3 or 4 or 5 years of my teaching was around how do I use teacher talk and explanation and modeling and direct and explicit instruction as sort of a last resort. How do we get the kids to construct knowledge, discover the math on their own? Um, because that's what I was told was sort of student centered. It would be student centered to let the child discover, construct, and lead the learning. And here's an image just like taken from one of my classrooms. The kids are in groups. They're they're putting pieces of paper together and stuff. I don't know. It's some sort of activity. And the activity was meant to teach. And I meant to circulate and to give feedback and suggestions and hints. If the kid doesn't know how to do it, I, kind of put a finger, and pretend like I'm thinking and cheekily go, I think if you ask your teammates, they can help you figure this out. I spent a lot of time doing teaching like this, trying to make it work. And I was applauded for this kind of thing. The principals would come in and be like, you got to come to Zach's class. You got to come see this because it was busy. It was aesthetically what the values of the school were meant to show. But here's the thing. You drill down into the students' responses. You got into like the level of what they were actually thinking about, and you'd find very predictable outcomes. You'd find the same kids were leading the discussion, the kids who came in already knowing the math. You'd find that the kids that I got into teaching to serve, the kids who struggle to to attend and to focus and to process information on the very best of days, you found that they were sidelined in these type of teaching scenarios. Um, and I'm a bit embarrassed about it actually because I kind of bought into something based on what I thought was best practice, and over time it just became so clear and so apparent that the kids that already know the math are the ones that are discovering it, and the kids that don't know the math are basically being sent into interventions on because of me, and my scores weren't very good. So, I mean, over time, I even kind of went more extreme. My students aren't learning, is what I found out from these things. So, why don't we even go farther than that? Let's let them determine how they learn, with whom they learn, what learning style they use, and what they learn. And because this is student centered, this is what's best for kids. And these are more pictures of my classroom where it was like time in class, precious class time started to become uh, allocated towards sort of crafts and DIY type of stuff, things that the kids could do and get messy. These are perfect for the brochure on a school like this. Like they're great for advertising for a school, but you know, I like this picture because it's basically the most dangerous thing in the order of how dangerous it is. If you go to the left, you see a soldering iron. And then if you go here, you see these box cutters. But of course, the most dangerous thing is if you've ever been a parent walking around at night in your bare feet, stepping on a Lego is certainly more dangerous than the other three. So it actually works out how randomly that is. But I, you know, th th this kind of thing, it just became apparent to me that is this what school is for? And is this the best way to teach? I had a student, and this is a real piece of her work. I had a student who spent about 6 months constructing this exact friendship bracelet. She she was always one of those kids I was reprimanding or we were getting in trouble for not focusing and not doing anything. And you know what? In third grade, she couldn't read on level. She couldn't calculate fluently. She struggled with math and she struggled with science and she struggled with everything we did. To, and you know what? Honestly, she felt stupid. She felt she felt like she wasn't as smart as the kids around her. And I was giving her an education based on what people around me told me was best to do that didn't address these gaps, but essentially kind of masked them in activity, in things and stuff at the hope that it would somehow inspire her to be a mathematician or be a critical thinker or something. And we know that it doesn't work in reading, that just giving kids books is not going to teach them what the squiggles on the page are. And I'm here to tell you it doesn't work in math either. And there's a lot and there's a lot of evidence, I think, that suggests that our best path is to go a different direction. Now, you know, what actually is explicit instruction? Like I wasn't shown videos like the one I'm going to show you here. I wasn't shown what it actually looked like, what it felt like to be on top of your game and to get a whole class rowing the boat together and to get a whole class inspired and engaged in learning. I'll show you this video just to give you a sense of like how my teaching evolved over time. Let me see if I can get it up here right here. There we go. Just to give you a sense here.
First word we're going to learn is the word implore. Implore on two. 1, 2. Implore! And the word implore means what? Read it for me, please, loud and proud. Jovan?
To ask in a serious or emotional way. To beg.
Yes. When you think implore, think of begging. You are begging for something. Read the situation for me, please, loud and proud. Juju?
She implored the firefighter to go back inside the burning house to rescue her trapped puppy.
What did the girl do in the situation? Use a definition. What did the girl do in the situation? Jackie Tani?
The girl implored to the firefighter to go inside her house and rescue her trapped puppy.
Use a definition. Send us some shine. Shout out to Naili for being a really good teammate right now.
She asked in a serious and in an emotional way to the firefighter to go back inside and rescue her puppy.
Yeah, she's begging. So imagine this little girl begging for the firefighters. Please, firefighter, go back and save my precious dog Fluffy, right? How does the image demonstrate the word implore? 15 seconds with your teammate, go. Okay. How do you know?
She's doing this is like she's like down begging.
Perhaps, right? Perhaps.
It's like
Okay. Extra, extra. Track Maurice.
I'll give you a second as I switch back over to put your reflections in the chat. Now focus in on the instruction, not on some of these aesthetic things. I sometimes ask this question, what did you notice in this video? And people say, I see uniforms. Uniforms don't lead to learning, right? What about the instruction? What is specifically did the teacher use and do in her delivery and in the design of the lesson? Go ahead and plop that in the chat while I get back into the PowerPoint mode. Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, we're getting lots of engagement and opportunities to respond. Um, Encouraging the students as a community of learners, the shout outs, the shine, moving about the room at a brisk pace, positive energy, enthusiasm, right? Um, Absolutely. And and what I learned from I think just hitting my head against the wall so much when it came to sort of trying to use instruction as a last resort was that my kids weren't learning. But every time I brought them back to the carpet, I brought them back to me, I brought them to the board, and I carefully, meticulously took them through the math that they needed to learn and revealed it and gave them a chance to say it in their own words and and all of a sudden they were on their worksheet at their desk doing it successfully. I started to find that the motivation was there in the success. It was there in the fact that the kids started to feel smart. I can do this. I am capable of learning math at a very high level. And it and so over time I started to sort of shift. And now, I want to be a great teacher. That was always what it was. I got into teaching because I wanted to make a difference in this world. I wanted to. My mom's a teacher. She just retired after 42 years, and I want to help the kid who can't do math be able to do math because I wasn't able to because I struggled at that, right? And and instead of thinking about some sort of aesthetic of like what what kind of busy stuff that they should be doing, I should have been thinking about what is the evidence for effective teaching methods. What is the database from the science of learning and instruction and behavior imply for teaching, right? That's where I should have gone. And of course, that in the end, that is student centered. The student leading the learning doesn't center them. It's centering it's centering their needs and what is in their brains, in their cognitive architecture, putting that at the forefront and teaching for their success that leads to that motivation and that enjoyment and that and the academic achievement that later can allow them to go pursue their dreams and so on. Maybe you discovered that earlier than I did, but it took me a while. Now, this is where we sort of need to shift and think, so what is the evidence for explicit instruction? Clearly, like, you've bought something about this methodology. What is it? Like, what's in it? And what is, what studies have been done? What are some of the big hitters? And I'm going to explain some of these to you. And there's more than this than I can fit into this presentation, but this is just some stuff I think it really has a lot of implications for what we do. So let's get started. One of the areas I like to start with is sort of let's go back to the beginning kind of thing. Not the very beginning when we were testing this stuff on pigeons and rats, but in the 60s and 70s when Lyndon B. Johnson, the president of the United States, was tasked with spending what was about $1 billion for an educational project. And that money was supposed to be allocated towards what is now Head Start in the United States. It just there wasn't enough money, and there was this $1 billion earmarked for educational research. And so what they decided to do was put together a big research it's bigger than a study project that they ended up calling Project Follow Through. And this project was meant to address this big question of what works in education. Does the inquiry-based learning stuff work? Does the discovery-based learning? What about child-led learning versus teacher-led learning? What about focusing on their emotions? What about help educating their parents? What about reinforcement and consequences and rewards? What if we had like a horse race where we have a whole bunch of different models competing against each other? Each of the models is run by the researchers themselves. That way, there's no bias involved in the researchers selecting a poor condition to, a bad horse versus their preferred horse. Everybody has the best horse they could possibly have in this project, and the winner will come up, will that is ahead. We can trust that we're onto something. This might be an area to pursue. And of course, in there was a model called direct instruction, a teacher-led model in which there were very, very structured materials, lots of choral response, lots of practice and feedback and mastery tests at every interval. There was a model called direct instruction. What happened? Now, a lot of people have never heard of Project Follow Through. They never, I'm going to show you the results on your screen in just a second, but not a lot of people understand that or are aware of just how big of an event this was for education. It's one of the biggest expenditures we've ever done, if not the most expensive expenditure, and it may never be matched ever again, how much money they spent on this research study. Here's what they found. I'll give you a second to study your screen. Now, what you see on the right side of your screen, all of those trending down, those models pretty predictably account for the amount of open-endedness, looseness, sort of the romantic inquiry type of approach that I began this presentation talking about. Open education and was a model that was meant to increase self-esteem. People always ask me that. They're like, how do you teach math through a self-esteem model? I was like, I don't know. Ask them how they feel about it. I don't really understand how anyone would think that model would work. And guess what? It didn't, right? But you see that they're trending down and there's a line in the middle. That line in the middle represents students who were tested in Project Follow Through who did not receive instruction through a model. They basically received their normal daily dose of instruction from a teacher who wasn't in any of the models, but they still got tested on it. So if you think about it, that baseline right there represents business as usual, and all of the models that are downtrending, they represent models that actually harmed learning. Like, had the students not been recruited for the research, they would have learned more. And then if you look over here, there's only really one clear winner of this horse race, and that was direct instruction. And direct instruction's interesting because most people thought it would do really well in what they called basic academic skills, basically math tests. They would take a test of math, and it would show their proficiency in math. They thought direct instruction would definitely win that, but probably not problem solving or self-esteem. Like, problem solving requires critical thinking. That should probably be the preserve of the inquiry-based models, right? That's not what happened. The students in the direct instruction program also were better at critical thinking, creative thinking, brain teaser type problem things. people always wonder, like, why is that? This doesn't feel right to me. Well, it's because the kids were taught a lot more stuff and they knew a lot more things. They could draw on a greater reserve of foundational skills in order to solve problems that they had never been directly instructed. That's counterintuitive to some people because they think if we just focus on problem solving, we'll boost problem solving. That's probably not the right way to think about it. Probably the best way to think about it is if we build up knowledge and long term memory in terms of foundational skills, that they won't have to think about those things as they're solving new problems. They can bring to bear things that they know and solve those better than someone that doesn't have that prior knowledge. Now, self-esteem is also interesting. I talked about before, like, that I thought if you give kids lots of fun things to do, lots of non-curricular tasks and games and math, dice games and stuff like that, it might make them like math better. And they might feel better about themselves in terms of their anxiety, their stress, all that other stuff, their self-esteem. Well, direct instruction also outperformed all the other models in self-esteem. Why? How does that work? I mean, isn't it coercive? Isn't direct instruction, explicit instruction, isn't it like teachers imposing learning on kids? Well, no, if you think about it, if the kids are successful and they're learning, they feel smart. They feel good about themselves. It and they don't and they see the purpose in this stuff. They see that they're making progress and they don't get left behind year after year because um their teacher chose to kind of replace math with some of these other kind of playful things that don't really teach math. They see that they're making progress and they can keep up with each other and their self-esteem grows. Now, I'm going to go to another bucket of research, but before I go over there, what are your thoughts so far on that? Like, how does that how are you reacting or feeling about this information? Go ahead and plop it in the chat. Wow, and I feel like I appreciate you for engaging with this. If you're sort of on the fence or you're thinking like, what does this all imply? Hey, stick around. Like this is a professional community and a conversation we're having here. If you're feeling like being, somehow this is attacking you, which I feel like this is just an event in history we need to grapple with. Uh, Please stick around and have those questions. There's no reason to feel attacked at this point. I just want to just make that very clear. Um, Working with my teachers at my schools, we talk about these things in person and we can have a dialogue. Here we're online. You might feel like this is a one-way conversation. Let's not stop there. So in the next part, I want to talk about an area of research that came after Project Follow Through that really kind of took over education research and became what we could call now, what other researchers have called the cornerstone of education research, which was this research that was called the process product research. What you did is instead of having this horse race between folks, like we saw in Project Follow Through, instead the researchers simply came into your classroom and they observed what the teacher did, like their behaviors. Was the teacher modeling? Were they guiding practice? Were they giving independent practice? Were they asking questions and so on, right? And they coded all of these things, which these things are called low inference variables, things that are more objective, like that you either did it or you didn't do it, right? And they would code all of these things. That was the process part of process product research. The product was after they coded what the teachers did, their behaviors, they looked at which teachers had the highest achievement gains and which teachers had the lowest achievement gains. And you could see, like, lowest achievement gains, you can imagine behaviors like sitting down and being a passive person and not a teacher who's not actually teaching. That's kind of obvious. But the most effective teachers did similar things to each other. Like this. Come on, mouse. There we go. The most effective teachers ensured that students efficiently acquired, rehearsed, and connected knowledge. Many went on to hands-on activities, but always after, not before, the basic material was learned. They were sort of discovering this kind of gradual release or scaffolded model of the best teachers, ones who used hands-on activities as application, but not to learn the material, not to acquire it. They were sort of already implying something that we can call the instructional hierarchy. Essentially, that hands-on activities from the best teachers, those sort of inquiry type things, were best reserved for application in order to promote generalization at the end of the sequence, right? Other things, of course, they found. The teacher carries the content to the students personally rather than depending on curriculum materials alone to do so. The teachers were very much responsible for teaching the material. They didn't have students trying to teach themselves, right? Very often. Let's see if I can keep going. There's a great deal of teacher talk, but most of it is academic rather than procedural or managerial, and much of it involves asking questions and giving feedback rather than extended lecturing. We're starting to see a picture, aren't we? We're starting to see that this lecturing model is just a caricature. It's terrible teaching reserved for university professors, but that the best teachers were talking about the content and bringing them into the fold, right? So, my mouse is having such a hard time. Here we go. And over time, the researchers in this area of research basically found a pattern. They found these are the actions of the teachers that had the highest achievement gains. I'll let you take a look at your screen what those things consisted of. So a teacher presents the material, is very careful to only present a little bit at a time, asks lots of questions about the material, guides student practice rather than just saying, hey, go off, you're in the deep end, go try to figure it out on your own. They're constantly using formative assessment to check that everybody understands it. The success rate in the class is high. It's not engineering struggle. Rather, whether or not you like the word productive struggle or not, I find it to be confusing because struggle is bad, right? And so these kids were not struggling. These kids were successful in the classrooms where they learned the most. Their answers were mostly right at around 80% correct, right? Lots of scaffolds, lots of making sure the students don't do things before they're ready because that could cause cognitive overload. Practice, review, skills and drills and thrills, and lots of weekly and monthly review. And what did the researchers call this pattern? They called this pattern at first direct instruction, and then in later years, they called this pattern explicit instruction. These are the moves of the most successful teachers. This is what they do. We have to have a name. We called it direct instruction. The researcher most associated with this is Barak Rosenshine because he wrote a paper in 2012, before he died, that outlined this huge body of process product research and what it implies for teaching. Here's him talking about it right now.
Investigators found that all 8 of the higher achieving teachers based their primary teaching on explicit instruction. These teachers gave clear directions, explained concepts, modeled procedures, required practice, provided feedback, and supported student learning. Their lessons consisted of carefully planned activities with clear goals, logical structure, and step-by-step content progression. I'm quoting. These lessons proceeded at a brisk pace. These lessons were often presented with enthusiasm, energy, and a commitment, sometimes a fierce commitment to student accomplishment.
Take that in for just a second. And I want to give you an opportunity to look over what they found from this research. Uh, these are not techniques. They're more like buckets of techniques. They're more like principles. That's why Rosenscheid called them principles of instruction. And I think very carefully he wanted people to think of these as guiding buckets of instruction rather than sticking with the labels that he used previously, because the word direct, the word explicit, it just seems to imply to people that it's bad, when what it is a pattern of the most effective teaching practices of the very best teachers. So he called these the principles of instruction, and in other papers he called them explicit instruction and direct instruction. um take a look at these right here. Which of these do you feel most confident about in your own math teaching? And which of these do you find like, this is something I just am always working on and striving to get better at? Now that you've kind of rated yourself, I'd love if you could pop in some quick thoughts in the chat so that you can kind of read and process these key components of explicit instruction. But go ahead and pop them in the chat. Jason, thank you for sharing that. Now, um, this might be just Jason said that there's a time and a place for inquiry, right? Um, this might just be something that I'm stuck on mentally that I can't get over. But I have to ask this. An inquiry process is when a learner tunes in to a problem, formulates questions during their inquiry about the problem, then investigates those questions in order to generate a new piece of information that otherwise hasn't been created previously. Basically, the inquiry process is the scientific method, or the dissertation process that a lot of us PhD folks have had to go through. It's the process of trying out and experimenting and doing things like that. So where does that have a time and a place? I think that most people can see where that would be. That would be when they're armed with prerequisite knowledge that needs to be brought to bear in that investigation, and that the investigation isn't so hard that it just feels like the kids are being asked to do something that is beyond their capabilities, right? Like I said it early in a presentation today, like, would you find it enjoyable to inquire into how how plumbing works while there's water spraying all over your kitchen, right? So I the reason why I don't really think inquiry has a time and a place is because of the amount of instruction that is developed to get to that point basically takes away its its original meaning of what inquiry is, which is like the dissertation process. It's basically academic hazing if you've ever done it before. You don't really get very much help and you just kind of have to do it. And if you don't do it, you fail. Is there a time and place for that? Is there a time and place for exploring? That's a different question. Is there a time and place for application, for generalization, for adaptation? That's different. The type of inquiry project that really mirrors what is inquiry, I think that time and place is just, it's just so small, it's just so rare, and it often only benefits the kids who have a lot of prior knowledge already. um but you're free to disagree. What else? There are so many questions, oh my gosh. I've got to go ahead and let's kick off. Am I going till the top of the hour?
Yes, you have until 2 o'clock unless you'd like to stop early to take questions.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so there we go. So kind of continuing on, one of the things that I ended up going into in my teaching was working in intervention, and I ended up working with a lot of kids who really struggle at math. Kids who see themselves not as mathematicians, and the solution to their hearts, I found, was just great instruction that teaches them. Um, the idea that these kids who are often in middle school, 5 years behind their peers, could get anything out of applying grade level math to a project. um, it doesn't make sense on its face, right? And we have to serve these kids too. And like this girl on this left over here, who let's just name her Annabelle. Annabelle, she's a kid that just missed school all the time, right? She's a kid that when she is in school, her job is to sabotage the teacher's lesson because she doesn't know the math, right? Um, her but when she was in intervention, working with structured materials, structured step-by-step lessons at level, working on the math to try to bring her up in an accelerated way. You can see this as fractions. Like this would be probably a third grade lesson, and she's in seventh grade. Things change. Annabelle is sitting there in the classroom, enjoying feeling smart. And on top of that, because of the design of the materials, because the instructional design is so careful, it's not just try to figure it out kind of discovery stuff that frustrates the average, every person I've ever met. It's stuff that you can do this. It's within your capacity. She was transformed in that environment. I remember one time she'd walk out into the hallway. She was walking out in the hallway. I was walking her back to class, and some kid was like making fun of her or something, was teasing her for something. And she said, "You know what? Tell me this, smarty pants. What makes a fraction greater than 1?" And the kid was like, I don't know. Why do I care to know that?" And she's like, "Are you serious? This kid doesn't know what makes a fraction greater than 1. I mean, can you believe this?" Right? And she's looking at me. Um it's transformational, giving the scaffolds and support the kids need, keeping them in like the level of like their own ignorance by kind of using the things that they that giving them kind of childish type of projects and things like that. I mean, that motivation isn't there, is what I found. Because as someone said in the comments, success breeds success. Are we going to carve out a lot of time for instruction that essentially is addressing the enrichment needs of the top learners in our classroom? Or are we going to teach in a way that brings everybody up, especially the kids that struggle the most? That is a legitimate question to ask yourself, right? I also, at the same about time, just sort of kind of got into the science of learning. I didn't realize, I knew there was a science of reading. I didn't realize that the science of reading is inside of the science of learning, and that there's a whole body of evidence around randomized, using randomized controlled trials that would explain how kids learn and how they what tactics can be used when, right? And why? Um, these things were sort of totally absent for me. I sort of got into the PhD space, and I found there was a whole wealth of information out there. One of the biggest misconceptions, actually, I'm looking at the time. I'm just going to skip ahead because um, we just don't have enough time because I'm getting excited about what your responses are. Um, One of the things that happened with me in reading, of course, was that I tried to do this kind of whole language thing. I put out bean bags and books, and there's all these, um, uh, type of flexible seating type things. I'd give kids books, and they just would read them upside down, and they wouldn't they wouldn't know what they were reading. They couldn't learn the material in that way, especially the kids on the lower end of like the kind of the spectrum of of ability or of prior knowledge of working memory capacity. I would find that out very quickly that they really required to be boosted. And so when I go around to schools around the country now, this is so commonly understood. Learning to read is not natural. It's not one of those things that we evolve to acquire. But then when we're in the space of math, in the same day, in the same school, a teacher explicitly teaching phonics and vocabulary and comprehension on the carpet will break apart that lesson and have kids go off during math and just playing. Um, uh, a lot of what we're seeing in this country is an acceptance that explicit instruction works for reading in terms of structured literacy, but we're failing to recognize that the science of learning is supportive of methods of that involve explicit instruction that apply for everything we learn, whether that is how to dig up a fossil or how to swim or how to how to fix your garage, as I can see these workers outside are putting this down, together. That math is not some sort of special weird type of information. The math is just information. And not only that, it's very complex. The element interactivity of math in terms of needing to know what everything is, the smaller problems inside of bigger problems that you need to master, memorize in terms of your facts. These things make math very tough. And if anything, it implies explicit instruction is the pathway to inducting kids into this domain more than perhaps anything else. It's an interesting time we're in. As I was sort of kind of grappling with all my ideas, I came across this paper that is really, I think it's the second most cited paper in education research. It's usually in all different PhD programs in terms of a, a seminal reading that all PhD students in education must read. And the title goes, Why Minimal Guidance During Instruction Does Not Work. An analysis of the failure of constructivist, discovery, problem-based, experiential, and inquiry-based teaching. And essentially, the researchers outline the several decades of research that we do have that show that as these discovery type loosey-goosey methods, minimally guided methods, they call them, have been shown to be ineffective, they were replaced by another name, another label, right? This inquiry label and this exploratory label and this experiential label, they all imply the same thing. It's that the tactics being used do not harness what we know about how the mind works. And they, here's the abstract, but they essentially say this. Although unguided or minimally guided instructional approaches are very popular and intuitively appealing, the point is made that these approaches ignore both the structures that constitute human cognitive architecture and evidence from empirical studies over the past half century that consistently indicate that minimally guided instruction is less effective and less efficient than instructional approaches that place a strong emphasis on guidance of the student learning process. The advantage of guidance begins to recede only when learners have sufficiently high prior knowledge to provide internal guidance. And so essentially what they're saying is that the mind is not designed to learn from discovery and inquiry, although it has to in certain circumstances, like when we're out in the wild by ourselves with nobody to teach us. But the mind is designed to learn from others, and that the other people that teach us need to use very careful methods like direct and explicit instruction. And they go on to show a model of the mind that really has influenced many different schools of thought right now, and is the basis of what you may have heard of called cognitive load theory, where basically we have this, our minds are constructed this way. We have like what is basically a bottleneck in the mind called working memory, and that's our processing system. Right now, you guys are working with what I'm saying, so you're thinking about it in your working memory. The problem is it's extremely limited. You can only hold a few things at a time and only for a few seconds. So you can think about a type of inquiry project that was designed for the kids to try to figure the stuff out by themselves, work with a partner, deal with all the questions they're trying to ask. They don't know what they don't know, so they're just kind of randomly guessing and checking, searching around. This overloads working memory. The whole point of education, of course, is to build up long-term memory. And because long-term memory is where all of our thoughts and experiences and our not our thoughts, but our facts, our skills, those things are all in our long-term memory. Our long-term memory is our skill set. It's us. It's what we're able to do. And without a strong long-term memory store, we can't do anything sophisticated. And so what happens is we give kids problems like this, and we say, try to grapple with this problem, try to inquire, try to struggle. What it does is it goes from the environment into your working memory. You rattle it around doing guess and check, trial and error, and essentially nothing is learned. You may even get the right answer, but you don't know what you did to get the right answer. You may have taken a route that won't get you the answer when you're given a different problem. You certainly won't be able to generalize what you did to something else because you were just making it up as you go. And by the way, like crows and dolphins use that same strategy. The strategy of just trial and error, guess and check. It's not something that's particularly amazing. It's what we all do when we don't know what we're doing. And so we can't train that skill up. What we can do is teach you, and we can teach you what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So working memory is easily overloaded. And in the case of the research, we can test this pretty quickly. We give a bunch of kids a problem like this to solve, maybe 12 of them. We give the other group of kids a bunch of models, and they have the opportunity to be directly instructed and practice the problems, or just receive the problems and be asked to struggle with them. And what happens? It should be pretty predictable. When you give models, they learn it faster, and it's much easier to learn. When you give them models, it's much more effective when it comes to the tests they take at the end. And of course, this should be true as well, but it's more new research that when you're given models, when you're explained things, you feel supported and you feel less stress. You feel less anxiety. Your cognitive load is reduced. Things are easier for you. And so we don't need to engineer struggle. What we need to do is engineer success. We need to engineer kids who can do math. And that's what the researchers in this paper argue, and it's an argument that I don't believe has been overturned. I believe it's a very strong argument. So looking here too, let's just take something like phonics, which I think we're in a world of we must directly, explicitly teach this because the science of reading says so, right? And if you don't know all of this information right here, this text will overload you. If you do know it, it's so easy to read. All of you read it instantly. That's why we do phonics, is because how else would they discover the squiggles on the page? maybe some of the kids that have the most language rich experiences at home might, but the kids that are more disadvantaged or have dyslexia or anything else, they need support. They need explicit instruction. Now let's take this for math. The same concept applies. Math is not magical in this sense. For me, that's pseudoscience. The idea that math somehow has some sort of magical nature that no one can define that's different than all other information from the science of learning. We have information in the environment. It must be processed in working memory. Working memory is extremely limited. It's like a bottleneck, can only hold a few things in it at a time. You need to know stuff. And if you know your math facts, you know these procedures, you are taught the concepts, then doing 378 times 873 in a vertical orientation or otherwise is effortless. All of us can do that without any trouble at all, because we're not trying to struggle and inquire and discover it. We're using knowledge that was taught and is stored in our long-term memory. And so this is all to say knowledge is power. So what do we have to do, right? We get a problem like this and we have the kids, try to figure it out. What are some of the things that they need to be taught in order to be able to solve this so simply, so effortlessly? These things are smaller problems in a harder problem that imposes a very heavy load on working memory. Having kids guess and check is not an efficient or effective way of getting them there. The best and most equitable and efficient and effective way to teach them this is through explicit instruction. And I might be preaching to the choir, but I don't know. We're in a world in math education in which teachers are told to pose lots of problems and not get in the way of the kids figuring out for themselves, because somehow that's good math teaching. It doesn't hold up, folks. So the other main thing to really recognize in this research is that explaining the stuff to students, directly modeling it to them, teaching it to them, it really only needs to be done very briefly and at the beginning, when the students are just acquiring the skill, when they're novices, when their long-term memory doesn't have the knowledge that they need to solve this type of problem. That's where worked examples, models, demonstrations, this is where they live in full strength, because the kids don't know anything about it. And if they don't know anything about it, they're just going to be making stuff up and guessing and checking using means ends analysis. You model the material and it directs the students' attention and their cognition towards what they're supposed to think about. It's modeling, regardless of what people say about mimicking or whatever people said, is a fantastic way of getting kids to think about the right stuff. Not about, am I getting it right? Am I getting it wrong? Where am I going? Is this the right direction? But simply, this is how you do it. Awesome. Great. That's how an expert does it. I'm going to acquire the expert schema. I'm going to use that in the next time I do a problem. As students gain expertise, as you can see here, as they learn the material, as they acquire it, explicit instruction is systematically removing those scaffolds so that students can do it by themselves. This is where the people that mentioned earlier, where does inquiry have a time and a place? This is where this is where it would be. I just don't think that that's actually honoring what the inquiry people call inquiry. They are really meaning that the student themselves is grappling with a problem for which they've never seen and trying to ask questions about it and discover new meanings for themselves. I wouldn't want to take away what they call inquiry, because over here, we're just talking about application and generalization of the math, right? So we have this sort of trajectory that is lovely, that is predictable, that can help guide how we do our teaching and how we have, what do we do? We start by fully modeling the material and giving kids access to that information for the first time. We slowly take away the scaffold. We start to make them do it themselves. And finally, the student is doing it completely by themselves, and this is where we give them lots of fluency practice. And finally, once they are fluent and they are strong and they can do this in and out like nobody's business, that's where we might try to trick them and give them things that just aren't, are problems for which they have not been directly instructed, so that they can apply what they know to an unfamiliar sort of type of problem that doesn't have the same surface features as other problems that they have seen, if that makes sense. I always just wonder, like, is this common sense? Am I just saying something that everybody knows, right? When it comes to swimming, which I taught for many years, you would teach it by having students on the wall, learning the prerequisite skills of kicking, paddle arms, ice cream scoopers, starfish floats, on your belly, blowing bubbles. You practice the skills, but you don't throw them in the deep end, right? You carefully start them as polywogs. They move to guppies. They go to minnows, and they finally end up being sharks. And when they're sharks, the teacher doesn't even need to be in the pool anymore. They can be on the outside, and this time they're just coaching them. This is explicit instruction in a nutshell. And if it's good enough for swimming, it's good enough for, if you think about it, every career, every training situation you're in. It's good enough for parents. It's good enough for onboarding someone into a business. It's good enough for kids in math. And in fact, it's the best way to teach math. It's the most exciting way to teach math, because it honors working memory and the fact that we just can't do too much before we gain foundational skills. So, basically, if we teach based on how we learn, thinking about how working memory is this extremely limited structure, we have to just be very careful that we don't overload students. We need to break things down. We need to go step by step. We need to atomize the content. I think of content in terms of atoms, and all the atoms are connected by all these little nodes. We need to take this apart and just get kids to practice a little bit at a time, because working memory is a bottleneck. And once they get it, we start combining the atoms so that the kids are doing bigger and greater and better problems. This is just the design of explicit instruction. The other thing is that we know that long-term memory is the workaround for working memory. What you know makes things easier. Knowledge is power. So one of the things we have to do is we just have to build up students' prior knowledge. We have to build up their skill set. We have to get them fluent in the foundational skills that are required to do more complex math, so that the kids can focus on the complex math, on understanding what it is, rather than dilly-dallying in the world of math facts and procedures that they should have learned years ago had they had better instruction. And so cognitive load theory has presented us with a lot of really good recommendations, including these on your screen, that sort of direct our attention towards what are our best bets? What are some of the things we should be doing daily? What should there, I'm not really interested in what we do with 1% of our time. I'm interested in what we do on a daily basis and what dosage of things we should be giving kids. That's why I'm not entirely interested in the role of inquiry learning, to go back to that, because it's just so small and kids aren't doing well in math in this country. I'm interested in what we give them, the meaty part of their day. And this is the things like this, right? Ensuring that we don't teach them things that they don't need to learn about. We focus on the essential information. We break things down into smaller chunks because working memory is so limited. We use lots of worked examples, lots of models. lots of exemplars of what this looks like in action. We give them tons of practice because that builds fluency and the contents of your long-term memory. And then we gradually fade it so that kids do it by themselves. That gradual fading process is explicit instruction. It's the systematic removal of supports. So let's take a look here at one more teacher before we go. This teacher scaffolds the heck out of this learning so that the kids can do the independent practice with success, not with struggle, but with enjoyable, tasty success. Let's take a look real quick.
Let's summarize what we did here to solve this problem. What's our takeaways? I just want you to think for 15 seconds. Tell your neighbor, what do you want to remember every time we're doing synthetic division? All right, let's bring it back in 3. What's off in 2? Have all eyes on 1. Thank your partner. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead and jot down those takeaways that you want to remember. Capture them at the bottom of your notes page. We subtracted 1 from the degree here. So this is 3 minus 1 means that the first coefficient here is going to be 2. Every time that you're writing the quotient from the synthetic division. All right, let's share out. What do you want to remember? What's your takeaway? Let's go Clarabelle, Brito, and then Kendra in that order. Track Clarabelle. I'm sorry, Clarabelle. Thank you.
We can only use this method when the different factor is linear.
Only use this when it's linear. Always put a placeholder, you get the wrong answer.
I said that the quotient, when you're writing a quotient, the remainder must be written over the divisor.
When you're writing a quotient, the remainder must be written over a divisor. Let's add one. Another takeaway, what about the way you write the quotient? What about that is important? The way we write the quotient. Casey?
That if there is a value that the exponent is higher than the first value, then you need a placeholder. I need help.
Okay.
Rephrasing that sentence.
Yep. Vanessa? Make sure it's written in standard form. That's key. Angel?
For the exponents have to be in standard order.
Yeah, they have to be in descending order. Snaps for you all. It's time for practice. Flip over to the next page. You have 5 minutes to silently and independently answer problems 1 and 2.
Okay, what was the first thing? What was the first thing that Denarius did to scaffold this learning? Think about that for a sec. Because that's the first thing he did. He provided think time. He started with the think time, and then, anybody know what he did next? He had them talk to a partner, right? Thinking on your own is probably the easiest way to do this. Turning to your partner, you can just say it verbally. You don't have to write anything down. Then he had everybody stop and jot down takeaways for the math. So this is writing. It's even a little bit harder, but now they can handle it. They've thought about it. They've turned to a partner and talked about it. They've written it down. Finally, goes around and cold calls around the room, gets some kids going in terms of let's share and make sure we all got this. One kid didn't get it. We have to correct it. And now we are on to independent practice. But what is going to happen during this independent practice is that every kid will know how to do the math. And if you just listen to their responses, you see that the kids' responses are very sophisticated, that they are learning math quickly. In fact, this is one of the best teachers many people have ever seen. And this is what we're talking about. The power of a design and a delivery that gets kids, all kids, into the math without throwing them into the deep end too early. It gets kids to learn it much faster. It makes them feel better about themselves. It's explicit, it's direct, and so on. I think I have to end thinking about like a student that I had named Fiza. Fiza comes into me and she struggles with everything. She's from Sudan. She's missed out of school for many, many months. She has a noticeable disability, like a facial, like a drool, a disfigured face. The first thing I want to do, of course, is I want the whole class to embrace her and hold her hand and to support her because she struggles. But the next thing I have to do is think about the instructional design. How am I making sure that my explanations are punchy and crisp? And how am I making sure that I don't say the things I don't need to say so we can be very, very, very clear and explicit for Fiza and for everyone else's benefit? How do I make sure that we are managing the cognitive load of tasks by breaking it down even more granularly, if that's even a word, than we often think is necessary? How do I use lots of examples so that she can see what success looks like? How do I make sure that we don't leave practice to chance? We give everyone loads and loads of it. And how do we gradually fade her into independent practice just like that teacher did so even she can participate? This is what has been on my mind. This is what I believe is really important. And it's important to lots of people because the whole premise of this talk was the fact that the NCTM and the CEC put out a joint position statement very recently in which they omitted explicit instruction from their guidance. Here's the reply by Sarah Powell and colleagues. Among the many omissions from the position statement is an emphasis on systematic explicit instruction. In the high leverage practice documentation from CEC, the practice with the strongest research base to support its use with students with disabilities was systematic explicit instruction. Not including systematic explicit instruction in the position statement is educational malpractice, particularly for an organization like CEC that is designed to promote high quality, inclusive, and equitable education for students with disabilities. So here's my final argument here that I'm just going to outline. I'm going to summarize all this. I believe it's a social justice imperative, just like it was in reading, to give kids the best opportunity when it comes to learning that they can ever have. And here's some of the things we talked about. Students have a limited working memory that we're unable to increase directly. They have this bottleneck in the mind. You can indirectly enhance working memory by building up knowledge and long-term memory. Students come to school with different amounts of working memory and different amounts of knowledge. To close the gap between kids that struggle and the kids that are more successful, we need to teach this stuff efficiently and effectively. There's no time to waste. Our best bet from the research that I have read is through explicit instruction, a heavy dose of it. And I really appreciate you all coming into this and giving this a shot. I wish you the best for the rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming.